So I want to show you at least a couple of these videos so that you can kind of get a sense for the type of sabotage that is happening to your planet. And this is going to hyper focus mainly, I'm guessing, on the economic destabilization that's been happening on purpose. It's not organic. This is planned. And this is, going to demonstrate to you what's happening in the nation of America. But remember, all of the countries in one way or another are tied together. And so what happens in one nation has a dominoes effect and consequence touching other nations around it. And I suspect that the farther along we go, I haven't seen this video yet about a fertilizer shortage. And of course, in order to grow food, you need fertilizer, evidently. But we'll see the full magnitude of what's cooking uh, when everything is said and done. So definitely let's go ahead and look at these 4 videos together. Food banks across the country encounter mile-long lines as the U.S. enters the greatest depression. And I really wish that they'd stop using the word depression, because I think that ultimate collapse is such a more proper term to be used. You think back to, I don't know if you know it or not, if you've studied your history, but there's actually been 2 depressions. Now, one is always hyper emphasized above everything else, but I have read before that there was another depression as well. But anyhow, people will get this idea in their mind, well, we bounced back from that. It's okay. I mean, if there's a little bit of pain and bad, we're going to come back from this. It'll be okay. I actually don't think we should be using that word depression at all, because this is not a normal situation. And so, while, like I said, most of this is going to focus on the United States, you really have to understand that the scheme that has been plotted is one that deals with all of the nations. And that's a lot of people, man. That is a huge operation. And when you start thinking about, well, just how many people would have to be involved in the managerial, cogs or whatever you want to call them, aiding in each sector of reality, or however you want to phrase that, there must be a lot of people involved in this little scam to bring about this world of chaos so that they can reshape it back in the direction that they want. And unfortunately, that's just with a smaller population. And this is not hard stuff to conceptualize. This is the stuff that the UN has talked to about for a long time, Agenda 21. And you really have entered Agenda 21. And this is the setup that we talk about all the time. So it's coming. It's coming. 1 in 4 Americans laid off or experience a pay cut, and one third of, and he'll tell us more information here, did not pay their April rent due on the 1st. Did not pay it, their mortgages, their rent, and etc. And that's just in the first, we're going to say 3 weeks of this little experiment that Degrassi admits this is an experiment. And then I do want to find out what's rocking here with, Minnesota Senator Dr. Scott Jensen shocking, what revelation. So I'm interested to hear what Jeff C. has to say about that, because he always has something juicy. And by juicy, I just mean really interesting information to broaden your understanding of what's actually happening versus what you're being told is happening. And then the fertilizer shortages and false hope in the trucking delivery. And so let's go. This is the silver.
So I wanted to go over some very troubling signs that I think everybody should be aware of concerning the U.S. economy. Now, you might not know this, but most of the spending that takes place in this country, it happens by the poorest Americans out there. In fact, it's the wealthy who rarely ever spend. Here's the problem. those at the lower end of the wage scale, they have been especially hit during this crisis, and the businesses, they have been either cutting.
Sorry, I want to read this little blurb really quick before we get into this. So this is Silver Report Uncut. Economists, rather, at the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis, seems like there should be a comma there, project the job losses from the U.S. recession that could reach 47 million and push America's unemployment rate to 32.1. I kind of don't believe the numbers they put out now, and I don't know if this is where we're legitimately at. Like, I don't know what the truth is with that, because I don't believe our government ever. And I don't think anybody should. So this is 7% higher than the peak experienced during the first Great Depression, making the 2020 depression. Again, I think that people should start using collapse. The greatest depression. In 2019, household debt surged and reached a peak last seen in 2007 before the Great Recession. Patterns. Some have fallen under the spell that we are in the greatest economy ever, and that's because you have heard it enough to know every line of the script. Well, yeah, what about that guy from My Pillow that they got in front of the speaking podium for Trump as a little toady, who was saying that, oh, we're so thankful to have him, and I'm going to bring up, scripture like I'm a Christian, and I totally know that our orange president dictator is a Christian, even though nothing he does with the executive orders smacks of anything having to do with Christianity. Christianity is about freedom and choice, and has nothing to do with communistic dictatorship type of legislation. That's just the straight out truth. He was also touting, Trump having, such a great economy for us. And I think he signed in 2016. And, depending on what Trump was doing, one moment he's admitting the economy is terrible. The next minute he's saying it's great. I mean, he just flip-flops back and forth. And that's how the game is played. They talk out of both sides of their mouth. That's what they do. That's how Satan works. He talks out of both sides of his mouth through the people. And Jesus's brother James warned about people that are like that, the double-minded, double-tongued people that are unstable in all their ways, because they lack consistency for the truth, and they just insert lies into their speech wherever they can to achieve a goal. And so in that moment, for the lemmings, my son doesn't like me using that word, but for the lemmings that are tuning in to Communist News Network and Fox, you got your seeding dose, your brainwashing dose of the economy was good back in 2016. No, it wasn't. We have been experiencing financial cataclysm since 2008, if you're honest, but you don't need people to be honest on television from the podium. You need to continue solidifying this idea that Trumpy Trump is a Christian. Everything Trumpy Trump does is as a Christian, blah, blah, blah. And it's the lie. It is the lie being put out to people. Anyhow, he goes on to say here that, however, signs of economic stress have been present for a long time. We also see food banks across the country have been experiencing lines that are miles long. Seems like there should be a comma there. Reminiscent of the bread line seen during the Great Depression, except for this time, they are in the cars. The lines continue to grow as more people are losing their jobs. It's that dominoes effect, right? Once you get a huge number of people losing their jobs, it's only a matter of time before that trickles down to affect more and more and more and more. And then you kind of you all are going down on the Titanic together, kind of a thing. The lines continue to grow as more people are losing their jobs, and it is clear that we are witnessing an unprecedented with people. It's clear what we have been witnessing is unprecedented with people struggling just to secure a meal. In Americana, many food banks have seen an increase in demand, wow, of over 800%. Yikers. So you got Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, you have Phoenix, Arizona, Anaheim, California, and Fort Lauderdale, Florida.
Staff outright or freezing any new hiring until there's more visibility in how these efforts are going to work. Now, I wanted to cover the comments from Irina Navaleski. She would be the CEO of Career Builder. She said, "We've lived through the recession and the troubles in 2001. What we're seeing with this decline is actually worse than both of those events." Now, at the St. Louis Federal Reserve, they came out and projected that the job losses as a result of this recession could reach 47 million jobs. And this would push the unemployment rate to 32.1%. That's 7 points higher than what we saw during the peak of the Great Depression. To make matters worse, the service sector is in complete collapse right now. I don't know if it's just me, but ultimately I have no idea what's in front of us for the U.S. economy. We also know that services account for around 70% of the U.S. economy. The entire sector is collapsing. Employment contracted sharply. Hours have been reduced for those that are still employed. The employment index, it fell from positive 6.1 to negative 23.8. This is the lowest level ever recorded. Retailers are particularly hard hit. We see retail sales index in the Texas Retail Outlook survey. In February, they were at negative 2.5. Now they've fallen to an all-time low of negative 82.6 for March. We see the General Business Activity Index. It also was pretty low at negative 5 in February. That was before this crisis really set in, and now it has fallen to an all-time low of negative 84.2.
Oh.
In the grand scheme of things, most of the businesses have gone to zero except for those essential locations, but even there, spending is dropping because people are trying to spend at least amount of time as possible in the store. As a result, we are seeing those essential businesses even begin to cut down on employee hours. Now, I wanted to cover an article from the Medium where they said from restaurant workers, caterers, and Uber drivers to office and hotel cleaning staff, event venue staff, people supplementing their earnings with Airbnb revenue, income is cratering across the country for hourly and gig workers. Most of them have little to no financial cushion. 36% of U.S. workers are now involved in the gig economy. Most gig workers and hourly workers are walking a financial tightrope. They will not be able to afford even a short-term hit to their earnings. It will mean a further spike in auto loans and credit card delinquencies. It will mean a spike in healthcare-driven bankruptcies. It will mean unpaid rent. It will mean consumer spending will plummet. A sudden shock to the gig and hourly worker earnings will have a seismic implications for the economic and political future of the U.S. More than 15.5 million Americans work in restaurants. Of those workers, 3 million currently live in poverty. Unpaid rent will eventually lead to landlord defaults. Consumer spending now accounts for around 70% of the U.S. economy, and the government stimulus may not reach consumers until the end of April. Gig and hourly workers need help now. Now, previous to this entire event entering our lives, we were already in trouble. Household debt has been climbing at a very rapid pace. In 2019, household debt, it surged, and it had the largest annual increase since right before the financial crisis. Now, according to the New York Fed, total household debt balances rose by $601 billion last year. They climbed above $14 trillion for the first time ever. And according to the new report, the last time the growth was that large, it was 2007, when household debt rose by just over $1 trillion.
Whoa!
Now, the senior vice president at the New York Fed said the data also shows that transition into delinquency among credit card borrowers has steadily risen since 2016, notably among young borrowers. Now, here's the crazy part and where I think we could enter some real problems. There's a large portion of the workers that have been deemed essential that no longer want to go into work over concerns that they may become sick. This, of course, could lead to a breakdown of the entire system, which has already incurred one of the largest unemployment spikes in human history. We have
Okay, and that exactly is why I think that we need to be hyper vigilant over our terms that we're using, and we need to stop using the word depression, because what's being crafted will dwarf anything that even remotely looked like depression in years gone past. And we need to start. And I don't think that these financial guys that I listen to are Christians. I don't think they read the Bible. If they do, they don't ever talk about it. This is why the born again Christian takes the word of God as our, honestly, as our military level intelligence. I'm serious. To help shape our understanding of what is happening around us. And we need to start using words like collapse, preliminary, biblical end of days is what's happening. And again, it wouldn't really fit the model if it was just one or two countries. But the fact that this little game that they've played with this plandemic that Jeff came up with, or whoever came up with it, I heard Jeff saying it before anybody else, which I think is great, is global in nature. So that's what takes it from, oh, stuff happens, everyday stuff, blah, blah, blah. Nations have problems, big deal, blah, blah, blah. You can remember back to Zimbabwe that had massive financial problems. You can remember back to, I think Spain had some major financial problems. Greece, Venezuela, and I don't know what's happening with Venezuela. Not good things. But now we're talking global, right? So that's the game changer. And that's when we start using the vocabulary that actually illustrates the true nature to wake people up that this is a collapse, a sabotage of a global end of days setup, which I think is much more clear. And my Bible informs me and comforts me as to understanding that we are in the preliminary setup, and looking into the passages. And I won't spend a lot of time on this because I want to get back to what he's saying. And we'll do more videos later as I show you the italicized words in the three synoptic gospels dealing with the same content, which are all slightly arranged a little bit different. Some things are still the same. Some things have a variance for a reason, and you're supposed to look at them all together at once, not what churches have taught you, where this week we're just going to look at this and we're not going to look at anything else with it. That's not how you're supposed to study the Bible. Friends, you're supposed to look at all of it together in concert, because then you're going to get the full flavor of what he's trying to communicate to you. And he has subtleties. And if you are not in the position to pay attention to those subtle changes, to pay attention to those italicized words, to see he's made additions here, he's arranged things in a certain way. He's trying to help you understand where you are in space and time, and that we are to be comforted. So a lot of my videos are very hyper focused on, the people that are not going to get on the ark and what's going to be left behind for them. And it breaks my heart. It really, really does. It does. I know a lot of you out there too are major, softies, and it really hurts you that people are going to be making that decision to stay in unbelief and experience the flood of pain and judgment. And just like Tom Hanks said in his video, when the money's gone. But this is also something that we need to inside have a balanced celebration that we're almost done, and how wonderful that will be to see our King, and just keep all of that together and be able to use that joy to speak to others, give the gospel, and to spur within them a true and good understanding of where this is all leading, and the fact that the Bible is right there with us, walking step by step with us to lead us through this, and that it really isn't a situation where we're just left swirling in a drain of ambiguity. Oh, nobody knows anything. Did Jesus know this was going to happen? Yes, he did. And he's tried to communicate it to people. The Bible seems as if it's the last thing that people go to get their intelligence from. And he has a lot to say if we just listen and we take that time needed. Throw your TV away. Seriously, burn it on the lawn. No, I'm just kidding. Sort of. And pay attention to what this black and white and red words say, because it will lead you to the truth.
We've seen a huge rush in people hitting the food banks. Now there's reports that the food bank networks across the country have been overwhelmed, and some they're having a difficulty getting their employees to come in as well. Now the increase in the number of people that have been heading for the food banks is so large, they actually had the National Guard come out to food banks in Cleveland, Pittsburgh, and Phoenix to make sure that they can continue operating and to manage the volume of people and to make sure they remain calm. Now Sheila Christopher, she's the director for Hunger Free Pennsylvania. She represents 18 food banks across 67 counties in PA. She said, quote, "I've been in this business over 30 years. Nothing compares to what we are seeing now. Not even when the steel mills closed down did we see an increase in demand like this." Today's food bank lines, they're similar to the bread lines we've seen in the 1930s, except this time around, Americans are not standing around for city blocks. They're sitting in mile-long traffic jams outside donation centers waiting for a care package. Now this problem just began a couple weeks ago with the lines. They're getting much, much larger. And they anticipate that there's going to be a much bigger problem whenever the food banks begin to run out of food as the depression worsens into the end of April. Now we covered in Orlando that there was the church that ended up with a line that was over a half-mile long. But now there's another Florida food bank that measured miles long with multiple rows of cars. The food bank reported a 600% jump in the number of people in recent weeks that have gone as South Florida's service economy has collapsed. I wanted to cover the comments from Stephen Shelley. He's the president and CEO of FarmShare. They distribute food to the food banks, churches, schools, other nonprofits. They say the amount of people that are asking for food at food banks is unprecedented. The volume is at a level we've never seen before. Also, his company is running at full capacity at the moment just to handle the demand surge. He said the amount of food that he is moving to keep pace with the demand is overwhelming the system. Now, an article published by The Guardian, it revealed in Amherst, that's near the University of Massachusetts, they distributed 849% more food in March compared with the previous year.
Well, if you stop and think for a second, if our government actually cared about you, they would have given you an umpteen day warning, right? Like, okay, we're going to have to do this thing and minus, T minus 14 days or 30 days or 45 days or whatever, right? But they didn't do that, did they? I mean, just a good person, I put that in quotes, would tell you, okay, we're going to need to do something soon. I mean, even crappy bosses that are horrible human beings will say, if you don't do such and such, we're going to get rid of you in 2 weeks or whatever, right? That's just crappy boss. Sorry, some people don't like that word, but I like that word. It's the old descriptive word. But anyhow, your government just popped up one day and said, we're shutting this thing down. And so I think of the restaurants that they were operating as normal. Everything was fine. They woke up that morning and their business had literally been destroyed. No notice, no nothing. Workers lost their job. That is the act of an Agenda 21 global sabotage, but in the context of the nation of America, because that's where I live and that's what I'm talking about. But it's happening all over the place. They're not doing things for your benefit. They're not doing things that would help you and assist you and aid you, because that's not the goal. The goal is to just make you die and to suffer. And again, we're not in the tribulation yet, but they're setting things up. And as you just continue to read the text and really just, you're reaching out to the Holy Spirit and you're like, Holy Spirit, help me understand what's going on with Jesus's words. He keeps emphasizing in one of the synoptic gospels that these things must, and he italicizes these things, and he mentions what those things are in generality. The transhumanism, I am movement. I am is God's name. I'm a god. I'm a god. The war, and you kind of have to start understanding this from his perspective. This is a war on humanity. We have been trained to think that, it's this nation against this nation, or, even in the different world wars, it was many nations against many nations. But this one is different because this is a war on humanity as a species. By who? The Luciferians. And that's what you have to understand. That he was trying to get you to understand when he's talking about there will be wars. In your mind's eye, or you can write it in your Bible, or however you want to deal with this, you should put in brackets, at least I'm going to, war, and then in brackets, on humanity. And that goes right lock and step with Agenda 21 and Agenda 2030. Some people just shorten it down to 30. Then he says rumors of war. And that is really this idea of the setup, the psychological war of this, supposed, quote, invisible enemy. It's invisible, all right. It's just your regular, seasonal, and it rhymes with glue. And they have capitalized on this normative thing that happens every year that their own doctors in his journal, Fauci or whatever his name is, when I look at him, I always think of like some famous Nazi doctor from hell. That's what I always think of. He's admit in journals that this is the seasonal rhymes with glue. I mean, come on. And when I go out in public, I don't go out often, but that's just neither here nor there. But when I go out, I pay attention to my spirit big time. That God came inside of me and made me alive. And my spirit is not upset at all with regard to catching the glue. I'm not concerned at all. And in fact, I really have to make sure and nurture a sense of compassion when I see people with the face masks and all that stuff, because I need to remember in my mind that these people are not my enemy. These people are just lost. And I have to, I don't want to have that like superior, haughty pride, like I know more than you. That's because that's not going to help anybody. And that's the kind of stuff that God doesn't like. So you have to, at least I do. I don't know how you are, but that I have to like remember that these are people that need to get on the ark. So anyhow, the point is this, that they are capitalizing on the seasonal rhymes with glue. Their own medical papers show this, and they are just exploiting a situation to create and craft the rumors of wars. I was thinking about this morning when I woke up with a little hand tapping on my wrist. Why did he redundantly say war twice? And this is what I'm explaining out to you that I'm getting from the Holy Spirit in my observation as I look around. Why would he say there's war and rumors of war? That's so redundant. Why would he say that? So anyhow, I've just been asking him what the deal is with the redundancy of him saying wars and then rumors of wars. And I don't think the way that the church has been teaching us about that and kind of just skimming over it 100 miles an hour is what he wants us to understand about it. And I think that what I am suggesting, and I'm relying heavily upon him, not only for the biblical content, the geopolitical, what's happening all around you, what makes sense, what we're seeing, makes far more sense than anything I've ever heard in church. Not that I'm anti-church, but I'm very anti the TV churches and some, not all, but some of the churches on YouTube, because I think that they are big giant masons that are pretending to be Christians. And we've already talked so much about Jude 4. Just read the 4th verse in Jude, which agrees with 2 Peter 2 about these liars that would sneak in. And so that's happening. But anyhow, the war against humanity, Agenda 21 style, is why he says war. And then the rumors of war is the setup, the psychological operation of the lie saying that this thing is the enemy. Oh, when in all reality, it really is a war against humanity in and of itself that is setting up in this preliminary phase. And then he's very quick to note, but this is not the end. And he's not talking about the end of the end, that's 7 years. He's talking about the beginning of the end, that telescoping effect, beginning, middle, end. So that is what I am seeing. And then these are the videos that we're talking about that are showing the setup of how they're perpetuating the sabotage against humanity. And remember, when Tom Hanks, or when he had that picture of the glove being thrown away in the garbage can for his whole supposed, and I'm not going to say it, but the perpetuated lie, you know what I'm talking about. That was them telegraphing a message to you, but thinking that you're just too ignorant to get it. And I don't think you're ignorant. I think that's what he thinks. But basically, that picture is him saying we're throwing away humanity. Well, not them. They're the rich millionaires, billionaires, and trillionaires. They're the important people who are going to become gods, don't you know, through technology and witchcraft and their secret knowledge. Masons are Gnostics that are Satanists. Get it? And they're throwing you away, humanity. This is what makes far more sense. And I'm running with that because that's what I'm getting from the Holy Spirit and what's going on around me, not what the churches have been telling us, the TV churches forever, about war and rumors of war, and just gliding over that like it's inconsequential. And then trying to tell us that that was the beginning of the end. No, you got to go down into verse 7 to start seeing him detail out what would constitute the beginning of the end. And much more could be said about that. We'll end up doing videos about that when we have time. But we're taking all these convoluted pieces of the puzzle and pouring them through a biblical worldview and getting our information directly from the Bible. And the prayer, the fasting, the reaching out to the Holy Spirit, the direction that our Paraclete gives to us. And he is looking to see, is there anyone out there seeking understanding? And let us be people that are doing that very thing, crying out to him, help. What do you mean? What's going on? What did your word say? What did Jesus say? How does what Jesus say compare with what's going on now? Because you have a lot of channels out there that are trying to convince you right now, no, you're in the tribulation now. No, you're not. And there is a big game being played for people's souls to convince you, you've already lost. You're in the tribulation and their death is on your doorstep and there's nothing you can do about it, Bubby. That's what they're trying to tell you. And I would tell you that that is part of the psychological game. I would tell you that that is part of the rumors and that there is still time, although it is every day, ticky, ticky, tick tock. One more day lost, one more day lost. And so we're, I believe, at 191 days out, if I'm not mistaken. You can look that up yourself, for the next opportunity for the pickup for the Feast of Trumpets and for Revelation 12:5, the harpazo, the rapture, the gathering together, the glorification, the bye-bye. And so this is the way that they're enacting these things. They're throwing away humanity. And you have a little bit of time, it would appear, as we see the day approaching. Hebrews 10:25.
second largest increase in western Massachusetts was an increase of 748% at the Pittsfield Pantry. The Grace Klein Community Food Bank in Jefferson County in Alabama, they provided 5,076 individuals with food boxes last week, which would be a 90% increase over the previous week. In southern Arizona, demand has doubled. Pantries are currently supplying groceries to 4,000 households every day. That's double the number that was supplied in March 2019. Now, Michael McDonald, he's the CEO of the Community Food Bank of South Arizona. He said, "We saw an increase during the federal government shutdown, but nothing as rapid, massive, or overwhelming as this." Now, they say there was a helpline that was set up by the Greater Pittsburgh Community Food Bank. They've received over 1,000 calls in the past 2 weeks. 90% of those came from newly unemployed people. Pantries, they ordered 50 to 60% more food from March and April than usual. In Chicago, the Lakeview Pantry, they said they're on track to provide food for as many as 2,000 individuals this week, compared with 1,100 before this crisis. In North Florida, there's a food bank there that relies heavily on contributions from retailers. They said they have seen donations drop by 85 to 90% because shoppers have been bulk buying and the grocery stores have nothing left over. They said donations from restaurants, golf tournaments, and even Disney World have increased. So the food bank is switching to ready meals, paying furloughed chefs to cook for thousands of senior citizens in housing facilities. In Las Vegas, the 3 Square Food Bank, they've increased weekly food distribution by 30% from 1 million to 1.3 million pounds of food. The drive-through distribution centers have been set up across the valley, and 170 of 180 distribution outlets have been forced to temporarily close. Every line at every distribution center exceeds the amount of food in our trucks. That's according to their Chief Operating Officer, Larry Scott. In Kansas City, Harvester's Food Bank, they serve 16 counties in northeast Kansas and 10 in northwest Missouri. They sent out 12,000 boxes to pantries as of Monday, March 23rd. That's an increase of 140% on the 5,000 boxes that are typically ordered. They said it was the largest distribution day in our 40-year history. Now this, of course, is probably a direct result that nobody had any money set aside for emergency savings. We do know that according to recent surveys, the majority of Americans, they have been living paycheck to paycheck, and there's simply not enough at this point to be able to supply this great need. Now I wanted to cover the comments from Jerry Brown. He's a media spokesman for St. Mary's Food Bank in Phoenix, Arizona. He said, quote, "First, we saw people who lived paycheck to paycheck, got laid off, and didn't know where the next meal was coming from, followed by those who had a couple weeks of savings. Now, people who knew about us because they donated or volunteered are coming in for food. The 2008 recession doesn't touch this. It's a different ballgame." For those who would like to underplay the severity of this crisis, it's possible their stories will change after they too are visiting the food banks in search of a meal. Now, we've already covered the fact that millions of Americans have lost their jobs, but they also can't go outside to go around and search for new jobs. So this crisis is only really just getting started. This really can't go on for very long. And since we have a rush of food banks that are closing down due to the fact that they can no longer supply the need, or they can't get their employees to come in because they're afraid of being in contact with all of the community residents, we're only a few weeks into the hard times, but it's already become incredibly clear that the America that we have known will never be the same again. The real disturbing trend that we have seen is that already donations, they have been shrinking. And of course, while there was a short-term boost to supply as a result of many of the restaurants and hotels shutting down and delivering their food over to the food banks, with tons and tons of small farmers going bankrupt across this country due to their main customers going out of business, it's likely that the supply is to be further disrupted. Whenever they come out in the media and they blame the empty shelves on panic buying, what's interesting is that many areas, many states have already instituted rationing. It might not be their state, but individual grocery stores simply cannot bid enough to be able to gain access to the food that they so desperately need to fill their shelves. Many people who really didn't see this coming simply didn't have enough time to be able to prepare. It's no surprise as a result of this we are already seeing a dramatic surge in crime across the country. The question I have is, how long are people going to remain in their homes without jobs, without any money, without any food? During the Great Depression, there was a strange phenomenon in which farms were failing on one end of the country and people were desperate for food in the other end of the country. And it seems like we're looking at a very similar situation. The system was just simply not designed to handle this kind of depression.
Well, this is why they're exploiting it. They know the weaknesses. They know all the weaknesses. And this is a new world, and you know the other letter, takeover. This is not hard to understand. This is a sabotage where you purposefully knock out the pins of support and strength underneath the support structure. You take them out on purpose. You poke enough holes in the boat that you overwhelm the system. The ship sinks. You're on the Titanic and it's going down. And there's Christ, and he's on a boat. He is the boat, and he's floating by, and he's offering salvation to anybody that will jump onto him. You just can't take your sins with. That's the whole kicker. And it's an act of your will to say, I submit to you. Go ahead and destroy my sin nature, essentially. I place my sins on you for you to pay them and get rid of them. And that's what happens by the time you get glorified, because you are gifted a sinless nature. That is what Christianity encompasses, that the church does not hyper focus on. And much more could be said about that. And he will catch you. He's very good. And he won't turn anybody away. He won't go, no, you're not good looking enough. No, you're annoying. No, you're stupid. That's not Christ. Christ will take anybody who is willing to jump into his arms, metaphorically, and put your faith in his death, burial, and resurrection for the forgiveness of sins, and to become part of his new creation, an eternal creation on an eternal earth and an eternal heaven later on down the road. And so you're going down in preliminary setup for the sabotage, but that ark is still available. But this is the thing, is that when he fulfills a Feast of Trumpets forthcoming, you have to be in the Lamb's Book of Life before he comes. Because once he comes, he accepts your rejection. When you study the Jewish worldview of the Hebraic culture, you understand, oh, Feast of Trumpets is Judgment Day, the day of Christ. And if you're not in him, he said it best. Those who are not with me are against me. And he did not stutter when he said that. He meant it. So you want to make friends with him and let him take your sins for you. And you are running out of time. Massive default wave. Oh, that sounds lovely.
You know there's a problem when a large percentage of people can't pay their rent. That's not something to ignore. That's not something to buy the dip over. That's not normal. Instead, we should be spending just 2 minutes to think about what happens when people don't pay up. What is the domino effect? How will this impact the economy? Of course, we could do that. Or we can just buy anything and hope the Fed will have my back. Well, you came here for the truth, so let me unveil that for you. Today we are going to talk about the massive default wave. This is a very important video that contains a lot of information related to reality. Yes, I can show you PE ratios. Yes, I can show you what's happening with the 50-day moving average. But what does it mean to you as the individual? We look at the technical analysis here on this channel. We look at the fundamental analysis on this channel. But of course, what does it all come down to? It's you, the individual. So we're going to get into a lot of that today. If you stick with me until the end, you're going to get the download, let me tell you. So let's begin by taking a look at this article out of the Wall Street Journal. Nearly a third of U.S. apartment renters didn't pay their April rent. I want you to think about this for a moment. It is significant when you see a third of the individuals in the United States not being able to pay or simply didn't pay. Don't just think of those people, but can they stand 3 months? Can they stand 4 months? Well, we're going to see, and I don't think it's going to end very well. Nearly a third of U.S. apartment renters didn't pay any of their April rent during the first week of the month. This data that we're talking about here is from 13 million rental apartments, so it is significant to see how people simply cannot pay up. And why wouldn't they, in a sense? Because they can keep that money in their pockets while they're given that leeway, while they're given that time. If they're able to wait 90 days to pay up, just in case, it's like an insurance policy, hey, I'll hang on to it for 90 days. Now that's fine for that individual. They're going to be totally fine if they have that money and it's simply a matter of just paying up at the end of that 90 days. But what happens to the lenders? Well, we could see a cascade that occurs. Real estate operators and analysts have worried that unpaid rent could set off a chain of events that first cause commercial mortgage defaults, zapping investments and bonds backed by those mortgages. We are talking about the derivatives. Never ever forget about the derivatives. This is so important. So you have real assets, which is basically at the bottom of the triangle or the pyramid here. This is something I talk about in my first book. And then we have the fractional reserve banking, which is significantly larger, sitting on top of that. And in the top here, we got derivatives. That's of course not exactly to scale, but this is the way it works, where you have a very small amount of real assets trying to support the weight of this massive fraud that sits on top. And just imagine it like a set of bricks here, and if a few of these bricks start to fall off, what's going to happen to this entire upside down pyramid? It doesn't have a solid foundation. It doesn't have a support. It's supposed to be the other way around, but of course it isn't, and that's why it's so weak. That's why 2008 was so scary, because all of this started to unwind and they freaked out.
Wait a minute. Unwind or was perpetuated in an organized plan?
Why they took control of it, and that's why they needed over a decade of stimulus just to keep it going. Well, now today we're dealing with this again, and it's coming from a totally different reason, but it doesn't ultimately matter because the chaos is brewing. 1 in 4 Americans have either lost their job or had pay cuts. Now think about what this means here. 1 in 4 Americans, as always, it's a survey. We're getting sample data, but it's important. So many people today have lost their job. I put out a post on my community or blog section on my channel. I saw so many different people that said, I'm laid off, I had my pay cut, I know people that had their pay cut, or I know people that have been laid off. They keep saying, don't worry, this is temporary, but we've heard that all before. Now, I think for the majority of people, there will be a time in which they're going back to work. But for some of those, temp gets a new meaning because they're going to be in temporary positions elsewhere if they're lucky enough to get any job. We're going to see a huge uptick in Uber Eats and Uber and the gig economy. And while it's good that people can find some sort of work at some point, right now there is a major uncertainty going on everywhere in the economy and the financial system. But the gig economy is generally, for a lot of people, that's not what they want. They want a steady paycheck. They want a place that's going to give them the benefits. They want to work in their field, perhaps. There's so many things here that are not being addressed simply by looking at the unemployment rate, which, by the way, of course, I'll show you in a second, is going to skyrocket. But when they showed us this number of 3.5%, there's so much more to it that it doesn't tell you anything. It's hilarious, actually. Think about how many people have 2 jobs. Think about how many people have been completely out of the workforce entirely. They drop off the numbers. Think about how many individuals are working part-time when they really want full-time. Think about the individuals who can't find work in their field. They're working at, some meaningless job to them. The pay is significantly lower, but that's just the way it is. There's a lot going on today, and I think this situation that's happening is exposing some of that. 5 million more unemployment claims expected, but now layoffs are broader and could be more permanent.
Okay, so it was 10 million. And then it went to 14 million. And so this is brand new April 8th. Now they want to go 5 million more projected. So that is now 19 million.
Is big because we're being told temporary, don't worry about it, we'll get everyone back up and running, hopefully it'll be within the next few weeks. Then a few weeks comes, well, hopefully it'll be in the next few weeks. We were told this whole thing about the trade deal for a year and a half easily, and now what's happening with the trade deal? Does anybody know the numbers related to China's purchases of US soy, of all the other products? Hundreds of billions of dollars were supposed to have been bought, and by the end of this year, I think the total is going to probably be closer to zero. But let's not talk about that right now. Let's ignore that because there's another issue happening. But that was big, and that was a year and a half. And as soon as it was all signed on the paper, which, by the way, a certain somebody didn't even bother showing up to sign it because the whole thing's a joke regardless, but it just tells you what's happening at this time. Claims for unemployment benefits last week are expected to total about 5.25 million, bringing the number of Americans filing to more than 15 million.
So those are not the stats that I heard. So Silver Report Uncut was the one that talked about 14 million. So this guy here is talking about 15 million. Okay, so we'll say, to keep it simple, between 15 million plus to 19 million. But at this point, when you start getting into figures of millions, I mean, come on. You've just got a disaster in the making as they are perpetuating this war on humanity. That's what's going on.
That's huge. I'm interested to see how this plays out. Wall Street Journal survey, the situation happening today could cause deep U.S. contraction, 13% unemployment. That's something that I've been hearing. We're looking at so many different surveys that are coming out, estimations, expectations, nobody really knows. But of course, the numbers will be big. They will be unprecedented. And based on what we're seeing, it will exceed the financial crisis. There's no doubt about it. We keep hearing about this V-shaped recovery. Even Janet Yellen is saying that isn't likely, and now we're starting to see the forecasts that are coming in a little bit more of, let's say, gradual. Well, I don't like to make those forecasts, but I've made it very clear how I personally think this will play out. I'm not going to get into the details of this whole article, but you got to read this. In one hint of the trouble to come, researchers at the City University of New York found at the end of March that 44% of New Yorkers expected to have trouble making their April rent. 44%. Now we're talking huge numbers. Now this is a place in the United States that is particularly expensive. When you have people that are making 100K and that isn't enough to get by, you know you've got a problem. The rent there is anywhere between $3,000 and up from the statistics I have seen. Of course, there's wide variances depending on the area and so on. But I believe the average was over $3,000 a month. That's just your rent, then your food, then your utilities, and everything else involved. Imagine the expenses that somebody has to pay, and yet the average person isn't making $100,000 a year. That's for sure. So what are they doing? Well, a lot of people, they commute in. They're dealing with the traffic. They're trying to make ends meet. I get it. But so many people, they don't really make ends meet. That's the way it is. They have to go into debt. They're going into debt at a rapid pace, and it's unfortunate. And really right now, today, we're seeing why this is a bad thing. Because if you lose your job and you're paycheck to paycheck, you're going to get screwed. It catches up to you. People leverage themselves. They use margin. They push it to the limit. Why? Because interest rates are so low. With interest rates being low, why not take the risk? There's nothing to lose, but we see today exactly why. Never forget that the Fed is your friend, okay? This is really important to understand. That's what I really wanted to hammer home today. The Fed is basically, like, when you do this, the heart symbol, that actually means the Fed, okay? The Fed is lifting Wells Fargo's asset cap so that it can help lend to small business. You know what? I want to extend a thank you to the Federal Reserve for being so generous, for being so fantastic. I mean, everybody should go to the Federal Reserve and just get down on their knees and just thank them. Thank you for pushing stocks higher. I mean, we owe everything to them. Do you want to know why the sun comes up in the morning? That isn't a natural occurrence. This is actually Federal Reserve QE making this happen. The sun exists because of the Federal Reserve. That's how important they are. They are the ones who actually created H2O. Without that, there would be no H2O. I just want you to know that. Quantitative easing is the solution to all problems, okay? If you have any problem, you just put that QE on it, okay? You just put QE. If you're sick, you put the QE on it. If you have a headache, you put the QE on it. If you got problems in the financial sector, you just put QE on it, all right? Now that's enough ridiculousness. In a move aimed to accelerate the loans to small businesses, the Federal Reserve said it is lifting Wells Fargo's asset cap. Now check this out. What is this asset cap all about? The limit was put into place following the bank's fake account scandal. So they're in trouble. They've got some serious issues here. They put a cap on them, but now we need your help, Wells Fargo. All right, cap's gone. Punishment's gone. Don't worry about it. You can make more profits. This is what it's all about. They use the crisis as an opportunity every single time, and people don't know what the hell's going on. They can't figure it out. They're blinded by the QE. Well, it's hard to look at the sun, and they say don't look directly at it. Keep your head down and shut up.
Yep.
That's all for this
Department of Health on how doctors should go about filling out a cause of death certificate. The letter from the Minnesota Department of Health gives advice to physicians, physician assistants, and others who certify deaths. The doctor says the letter takes you to a CDC website that has recommendations on how to include COVID-19 as a diagnosis for someone who has never tested for COVID-19.
Say I have a nursing home patient who's frail and 88 years old and comes down with a cough and a fever, and after 3 days ends up passing away from pneumonia. I'm not going to put influenza on that death certificate. So I doubt that I would be inclined to put COVID-19.
Dr. Jensen says each state's reported death numbers are making a lot of people fearful, adding that getting the number right is critical, especially during a pandemic.
I worry that sometimes we're so darn interested in just jazzing up the fear factor that sometimes people's ability to think for themselves is paralyzed if they're frightened enough.
One of the scenarios listed under the CDC guidance for certifying deaths due to coronavirus says, although no testing was done, the coroner determined that the likely underlying cause of death was COVID.
Was identified with COVID-19, that it would be appropriate to diagnose on the death certificate COVID-19. Now, we've not done that. If someone has the pneumonia after and it's in the middle of a flu epidemic, and I don't have a test on influenza, I don't diagnose influenza on the death certificate. I will say this elderly patient died of pneumonia.
I don't mean to interrupt you, but my heart is sinking right now as you're telling me this. You're a doctor. Why in the world would they be sending you out information to fill out death certificates, whether the person's been diagnosed with COVID-19 or not, but then to say in the death certificate this person's death was caused by COVID-19? That does not sound right to me.
I went to the person in our office who does most of the death certificates over the last 10, 20 years, and I said, does this sound right? I had her look at the documents that I printed off, and she said, well, we've always been told that you always put down just facts. You don't put down any probabilities. You don't put any presumptions down. It's just what you know.
Stop.
Supplies shouldn't be affected. We don't expect any supply chain disruptions. Oh wait, China straining to get supplies to farmers. American Trucking Association, critical deliveries, various restrictions on movements and travel are imposed. Gee, that's an opposite message. World merchandise volume down. That includes fertilizer. Americans not making mortgage payments soar by 10x. 30% of renters didn't pay April apartment rent. So you got to wonder, do you think the suppliers are also not paying their vendors? Do you think that would be a lockup in the supply chain as well? And we're going to talk about this in depth tonight, Ransom and myself. Streaming live 10 p.m. to midnight at 420 TV, Freedomist Films, Revolution Radio, Studio A, freedomslips.com. Well, that's a first. The FDIC posting a video on YouTube urging Americans to keep your money in the banks. And it looks like the banking system could be in for a 10 times larger shock than the housing meltdown in 2008. And it's quirky that if it was such a stable financial system, the FDIC wouldn't need to say a word. With this much inflation on the way, only one investment stands out: gold. Patriot Gold Group has no fee for life IRAs where your IRA or 401k can be in physical gold. Goldgroup.com. The link is not good for the gander. China, difficulty straining to get supplies to farmers during this unprecedented time. China's supply chains are just as vast as the United States. Plus all the manufacturing's over there, exactly where they make fertilizers and different constituents to reconstitute here in America to get our fertilizer production for this planting season. Yet as the article continues in The Economist, containment measures could affect delivery of inputs such as fertilizers, which they're also experiencing as we speak across China. Now America, being several weeks behind that country, so you would think the same outcomes would arise. And Jennifer Zeng, if you're looking for information about China at the moment and what's going on there with supply chains and government cover-up, this is your one stop right here on Twitter. But also, interestingly, the Chinese were really fascinated by the size of the hailstones, but the shape as well. So they were looking at it as more of a sign of, wow. But you know, this kind of hail, when it gets this large, you always see the protrusions that look exactly that starfish shape here. But with the same outcome expected from China and the United States, both with disruptions in shipping supply chains, I was shocked to read this successful farming article here that nothing should be impacted, including seed, fertilizer, and chemical supplies in 2020, but delivery procedures will change. A Nutrient Ag Solutions says they don't see any supply chain disruption. Again, these are the constituents that would be talked about in any farming circles here. You got the nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, urea, potash, otherwise known as potash, and phosphate, among others. No supply chain disruption? Okay. And then we take a look at UPL, and they say most of its manufacturing facilities are located outside China, leaving them outside that whole constraint there. But then baffling to me is they say strategically located around the globe in 27 different facilities. Wait a second, everything's locked up and you got 27 different inbound points from 27 areas around the globe. That's a no-go. That's not functional. I don't know why they wrote that personally.
Because this is the age of lying. And the lying, the rumors of war, plays into, how do I explain this? The rumors are the lies that are being perpetuated. A psychological warfare campaign through lying words. You understand? Why? For the purpose of the campaign war against humanity. Again, the Tom Hanks picture of the thrown away plastic medical glove in the garbage can. I'm telling you, in the name of Jesus, is their visual pictorial, we're throwing you, humanity, away. Why would you do that? Because humans are made in the image of God. At least Adam was made in the image of God, and we're made in the image of fallen Adam. And if you get into Jesus Christ through rebirth, you are actually remade, reborn into the image of Christ, and they hate Christ. Who's they? Satan, the fallen angels, the demons, and the human beings that worship spirits. And then they hate all humans because God made them.
But then even further in the article, potential trucking issues. So far, it's not been disruptive coming out of the West Coast. Okay, that's the opposite of what we're hearing. Rest stops are closed, restaurants are closed, and they're forced to go through areas changing the number of driving hours so alleviation in the supply chain can happen. And then you see bottlenecks here, people dumping milk over there because they can't deliver it even in the same country to another place. So jumping over to American truck.
Okay, so they're playing around with the delivery system. Do you understand what's going on? We're talking about the sabotage of the food supply, the sabotage of the delivery system of the food supply. They then pepper out lies to you, and they are slowly but surely shutting down various food operations. So, you know, the milk dairy industry, the meat industry, the vegetable industry. The fact, we talked about this before, that they are not allowing for the purchase of seeds in storefront. This all goes together. And apparently now there is a fertilizer issue that would nurture the soil. And now there is an interruption to having that available. It is just, it's again, you can hear the of the dominoes falling in consequence, one after the next after the next. Do you see how gracious your Lord is to show you, watch, it's all tumbling down all around you. Do you still want to be a part of this? Or would you like to come into my ark and hide your life in me? Colossians 3:3. Your life is hidden in Christ Jesus. But do you think that people are even thinking about, quote, religious things right now? No. They think that they're going to weather through this. You are not.
Trucking Association, they're talking about an entire revamp of exactly what I talked about, their legislation, the driving hours, and all these different throughput points to make goods move across our country. And even here in the bottom paragraph that they were talking about, they're working together with government and local authorities so that drivers can continue to make critical deliveries, even as, check it, various restrictions on movements and travel are imposed. I think they're not trying to scare you that we're not going to get our fertilizer, that our yields are going to be incredibly low this year, and your food prices are going to spike.
And that's the setup for the slow rolling demolition of what will finally peak in your third seal. And seal 2, taking peace from the earth, Agenda 21 probably has a role to play in that. We also know, I think his title is called the Executive Director of WHO, is just straight out telling you in the clearest language, friends, that I've ever heard, we're going to do walk and knocks, and we're going to remove infected family members. Knock, knock, knock. Hi, we're here from the government. We'd like to help. So that's what's setting up. And then your third seal is global famine. Do you have the eyes to see what is coming in the distance? Can you smell the two messiahs that are coming? That's how close they are.
You see everywhere across the landscape, just regular foods can't be delivered, and there's labor shortages to pick or plant. Now, this is not a very good combination here. Now, to add the cherry on top of, something's very wrong, and all these feel-good stories, well, they're just there to kick the can down the road, in my opinion.
Expect cascading global impact as, you know what, causes massive manufacturing disruptions worldwide. This article was written back in the second month. Do you understand that? We're talking February 9th. Now you are in the early part of April. Supply chain disruptions are starting to hurt big time. They were talking about it all the way back in February because they're going according to a scripted plan for your destruction. Do you understand that? And I'm not mad, I'm just intense. And my word, can we have a little bit of emotion here? So the airlines, car makers, phone makers are already in trouble, especially Hyundai and Apple. The list of companies so far that have indicated that Q1 business operations will be impacted cut across a number of industries. So far, the list includes Delta, American, United, GM, Ford, Tesla, Google, Starbucks, McDonald's, Boeing, Nike, Wynn Resorts, Hilton, Hyatt, and Marriott. And the list will undoubtedly grow in the coming months. Shipping disruptions to the U.S. will hit the West Coast ports no later than March. Do you understand what's happening, friends? They are pulling apart the fabric of society on an economic level. They are pulling apart society on the religious level, in that they have interrupted our ability to group together and worship. They are just vile demons, these people.
Americans not making their mortgage payments soar by 10x in 1 month. These articles are off of Zero Hedge. Looking across the landscape of money movement, money in a pocket going back to a bank, either in commercial mortgages, individual mortgages, people aren't paying. And then the rental market as well. 30% of renters didn't pay this April. And now JP Morgan halting all non-government guaranteed small business loans.
Wow.
So what is that telling you? People aren't paying. People are behind in their payments. And there's a gargantuan lockup in terms of money squeezing out of a pocket to come back to pay. How about a vendor or a supplier, a trucking company? I bet the same thing's happening there. It'll be just another few days and we'll get those types of numbers coming out. But how long will it go? If you're not paying me and I'm supplying you with your fertilizer, do you think I'm going to cut you off? In case in point here,
Wow.
This world merchandise trade volume forecast, red line, green line on the right, it's looking more toward the pessimistic scenario. So the amount of merchandise, which would include base constituents for fertilizer and seed and pesticides and herbicide and fungicide, all wrapped up into a nice little ag package. Follow that red line. Because if you want to look at it in a different way that the World Bank put out here, they did trade growth versus the world GDP growth, and whoa, crashing on the bottom there. 2009 is the other big dip that you'll see as we go back in time, going left on the chart. That is exponentially above what happened in that incredible event in 2008, 9, and 10 where the global economy locked up. We're something double to triple moving into that. And somehow goods are going to keep flowing unimpeded? Yeah, I don't think so. And also looking at the earnings estimates going out a full year. This is on the S&P 500. That red line means factories stop. Oh. That means banking stops, transport stops. A reset is in play. So that's why the Fed's saying, hey, don't go get your money out, because they want to try to give you a haircut and lock it in just like they did in Cyprus and Greece. I highly encourage you to take a look at that. This is the U.S. currency circulation. Now, you notice the last time that so many people pulled so much money out of the bank? Y2K. Right now, second most. And then we got the FDIC saying, please leave your money in the bank. It's all good there. Please don't.
Well, when they do the negative interest rates, what ends up happening is that they start reaching their fingers into your bank account, taking the money out. Do you understand that? That's why they want you to leave your money in there. This is the Tom Hanks video, when the money is all gone.
Don't pull your money out. I mean, the reason they probably want you to leave the money in, that's my personal opinion, is that the more money that's in the bank, when they grab it and say, oh, bail in for the bank, there'll be more there to bail the bank out by using your money, called a bail in, which I also encourage you to take a look at what that is and how legally they can confiscate your money and give you what, 20 bucks a day? Was that how much they gave in Cyprus? 20 euros a day after they grabbed everybody's savings out of the banks there? Greece as well.
Yeah, he's talking about them not being able to withdraw as much money as they want. This is unbelievable. Hand over our money. Desperate Greeks beg the banks. Tourists can withdraw more cash from ATMs than country's own citizens, as thousands protest against the bailout deal. And that was back in 2015. Remember that? They can only withdraw whatever those figures are in their country's cash. And they had protesters. Wow, tens of thousands. Big problem. Okay, so yeah, the war on humanity and the psychological rumor mill of psychological war is what the Lord warned you about. And that's where we are in time and space. Okay, thanks for watching. Join me for the next one. We have so much more to discuss.